I think what's going to happen is that we're going to find much more evidence of a very ancient human presence in the Americas. I've spent a lot of time with archaeologists. What those archaeologists all confirm is that there have been human beings in the Americas for tens of thousands of years. And it's not surprising that that can be pushed back to 130,000 years ago, because part of the argument about the peopling of the Americas has to do with a place that we now call the Bering Straits between Alaska and Siberia, which during the Ice Age were at times a land bridge. They were exposed because of lowered sea levels. But migrants who crossed that land bridge from Siberia on many occasions over periods of tens of thousands of years would find themselves confronted then by the North American ice cap, which oddly wasn't at the tip of Alaska but began further in. So there was living space in a bit of Alaska, but you couldn't get through the ice mountains, these literally ice mountains, 2 miles deep, covering the whole of North America and preventing access to the unglaciated parts of America. The thing is that what happened around 13,400 years ago, there had been a period of global warming, and the ice sheets began to melt, and a corridor opened up between what's called the Cordilleran ice sheet and the Laurentide ice sheet, the two major ice caps in North America. And it's thought that the migration came through that corridor. Well, the thing is that exactly the same thing happened between 140,000 years ago and 120,000 years ago. There was an episode of global warming, an ice-free corridor opened up, and the same opportunity to enter the Americas was there at that period than it was at the later period. We have to pay much more attention to that earlier period, because my goodness, if archaeology is wrong about the story of the peopling of the Americas, if it's radically wrong, as it now appears to be, then our whole understanding of human history has to change. It's not just the history of the Americas, it's the history of the entire world. It has been an absolute article of faith amongst archaeologists that civilization began in the old world. The argument is that this is where civilization began, in the culture that we call the Sumerians in Mesopotamia between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, and that it began about 6,000 years ago, and that civilization is entirely an invention of the old world and has nothing to do with the new world at all, because the new world was populated so late. This has been the argument, and this is the argument that now radically and suddenly begins to change, that the Americas, this enormous landmass, resource-rich, bountiful in every way, south of Minnesota, south of the ice cap, vast land areas that are bountiful, get into South America, Central America, South America, the Amazon, just huge areas of land that were very, very offered great potential for human occupation. Dogma has said there were no humans there. Now the first bits of evidence are coming out that says there were humans there. And if that's the case, then we must consider the possibility that the story of civilization might have begun in the Americas, not in the old world at all. It might be a new world invention, not an old world invention.
Some of the more fascinating pieces of evidence in South America have come out recently about these channels and pathways that they've found in the Amazon that could not have been created any other way but by humans.
Absolutely.
Creating irrigation, humans creating piers like grids, like a city grid.
Definitely. The Amazon is a colossal mystery. First of all, to give some basic figures, the Amazon basin is huge. The Amazon basin is 7 million square kilometers in area. And within it, 5.5 million square kilometers remains almost entirely unstudied by archaeologists. And that's the 5.5 million square kilometers that is still covered by dense rainforest. And to put that into perspective, 5.5 million square kilometers is the size of the entire Indian subcontinent. So the view was, again, there was a dogma, there was a preconception. Human beings couldn't have flourished in the Amazon. It's not a resource-rich area. The soils are poor. It's a difficult area, challenging to get to, very far from the Bering Straits. So the view was that humans hadn't entered the Amazon until about 1,000 years ago. And then gradually, little by little, that view has begun to change. And it's begun to change because of the tragic clearances of the Amazon, because the Amazon rainforest is literally being cut down and turned into soybean farms and cattle ranches. And in that cutting down process has emerged things that shouldn't be there at all. For example, evidence that large cities flourished in the Amazon. enormous cities. There was a Spanish explorer who went down the Amazon River system in 1541 to 1542. He was the first European to cross the entire length of South America from west to east along the Amazon. He reported seeing incredible cities, advanced arts and crafts, millions of people, a thriving culture. And 100 years later, when other Europeans got into the Amazon, they couldn't find these cities. So they said, oh, Francisco Orellana, that was his name, made it all up. It was just a fantasy. And then in the last decade, as the clearances of the Amazon have proceeded, we've begun to see the traces of those cities. What happened was that the Spaniards brought smallpox into the Amazon. Smallpox devastated the local population because there was no immunity to it. There was a massive die-off. The cities were deserted. Within 50 years, they were completely overgrown by the jungle, and that's why they were not seen by the explorers who came in 100 years later. But now the jungle's being cleared, those cities are emerging, and we can say that a city like London, which had a population of roughly 50,000 in the 16th century, there were cities of that size all over the Amazon. Wow. Huge numbers of them. And then you ask yourself, how did they do that? How did they feed? Because it's a fact, rainforest soils are poor. It's one of the reasons these soybean farms are a really stupid idea, because once you clear the rainforest, the land is largely unfertile and you can't grow stuff on it for very long. So how did they feed all these people? The answer was they invented a soil. It's called terra preta. Archaeologists refer to it as Amazonian dark earths or Amazonian black earth. It's a man-made soil. It's thousands of years old. It's full of microbes that are not found in adjoining soil. It's based around biochar. And you can take a handful of 8,000-year-old terra preta and you can add it to barren soil, and that soil will instantly become fertile. It's highly sought after in the Amazon, and it explains how they fed these people. There was science in the Amazon.
How did they create this?
Well, this is something that's not understood. It's still not understood by soil experts to this day as to how that was done, but it's one of many intriguing pieces of evidence of much higher development in the Amazon that it has been given credit for.
So this is it?
This is terra preta, yeah.
Wow.
Exactly. And
so was that done by burns? Did they use controlled burns?
They did. One way that it was achieved was to do wet burning. They would be burned and smolder. They wouldn't burn fiercely, which just produces charcoal. They would burn and smolder, and that, what is called biochar, would result, and that's part of the fertility of the soil. But the mystery is the microbial content of this soil, which is completely different from the microbes in neighboring soils, and that remains unexplained.
So, what are the theories? Composting, some sort of advanced composting?
Yes, some sort of advanced composting. But again, what has not been explained is the microbial content of these soils. So there, first of all, is an issue of how. Two things: how large populations get fed in the Amazon, and evidence that there was a culture in the Amazon that was capable of manipulating the environment in such a way that it could support large populations with the invention of terra preta. Secondly, new evidence previously not recognized: the Amazon is basically a garden. The Amazon is a man-made rainforest. There are certain trees like Brazil nut trees or the ice cream bean tree, which are food crops, which are very, very valuable, and they dominate the tree regime in the Amazon. They're what's referred to as hyperdominant species. In other words, people living in the Amazon over thousands of years selected certain trees, which they then cultivated and grew. So the whole thing is not simply a wild, pristine rainforest. It's a very ancient man-made environment, and emerging from that man-made environment, as well as evidence of large cities, large populations, and this mysterious dark earth, are huge geometrical structures. We have in the UK structures that are called henges. I live in the city of Bath, and about 30 miles away there's a beautiful site called Avebury, and another more famous site called Stonehenge. And what a henge is a ditch which has been dug deep, and then an embankment has been pushed up outside the ditch. When people first saw these structures, they wondered if they'd been built for defense. But then it became obvious they hadn't been built for defense, because if you want to create a moat, you put it outside your embankment, not inside your embankment. So a henge is an earthwork which consists of a deep moat with a large embankment outside it, and it can be circular, it can be square, and in the UK and other parts of Europe it often contains stone circles, megalithic stone circles as well, but the henge itself is entirely an earthwork. What we find in the Amazon are thousands of henges. that are now beginning to emerge from the cleared area of the jungle, and others that have been identified for the first time with LiDAR. LiDAR technology is being employed in the Amazon. It's non-destructive. You can see what's under the trees.
What is LiDAR?
Light imaging and detective radar. They bounce laser beams down into the jungle. There's a whole pattern of them. You need helicopters, and but it doesn't damage the rainforest. And you can strip away and see what's there.